Proteus, I really do think you need to have your head examined. I thought you said you loved Julia, but as soon as that girl's out of your sight, you pick up on another one named Sylvia and leave the other behind. And if that wasn't bad enough, your best friend Valentine loves Sylvia and she loves him, even though her father wants her to marry that fool Thurio. See, that's the thing about love. It's not often easy and it's not often kind. Did you ever think about what this is going to do to your friendship with Valentine? You have to finally decide if you're really going to stab him in the back and tell Sylvia's father about their plans to elope. And do you even know if Sylvia's interested in you? Even if you tell her how you feel and say yes to one woman and let the other one ride back in Verona, there's so many changes and tears you must hide for betraying your friend and your supposed love, Julia. Well, listen to me. When it comes to women, sometimes there's one with deep gray eyes, cute as a bunny, with hair of perfect yellow down to here, or even here, and plenty of money. And just when you think she's the one in the world for you, your heart gets stolen away from that silly little girl. And sometimes you really dig a girl the moment you kiss her, and then you get distracted by your best friend's girl just because she's unattainable to you. Consider this. When Valentine is on his way to elope to Sylvia, let's just say in walks her father and takes him in line and says, "I banish thee. You better go back home to Verona, son, and make up your mind whether or not you're going to leave my daughter alone or be executed." This will all be on your head. And you call yourself a gentleman. So man up, Proteus. I don't know why this is so hard for you to understand. You're a grown man. I mean, did you ever have to make up your mind? At the end of the 1983 film version of Gilbert and Sullivan's 1879 comic opera, The Pirates of Penzance, it's discovered that the pirates are all former noblemen who have gone wrong and are pardoned and welcome to rejoin society. At the end of The Two Gentlemen of Verona, the forest-dwelling bandits are also discovered to be former noblemen and are pardoned by the Duke and returned to society. So apparently, at least between 1590 and 1879, there was nothing new under the sun. So let's take a look at the plot. The play begins with best friends Valentine and Proteus bidding each other farewell in Verona. Valentine is going to Milan to improve himself and to see some of the world. Meanwhile, Proteus stays at home in Verona because he's in love with Julia. Following Valentine's departure, his servant Speed enters, and Proteus asks Speed whether or not he's delivered Proteus's letter to Julia. Speed says that he has, but rebukes Proteus for being a cheapskate and not paying him for the task. In the meantime, Julia asks her maid and confidant, Lucetta, which of Julia's suitors she should love. Lucetta says she likes Proteus the best. Then Lucetta tells Julia that she has a letter for her from Proteus. Julia behaves very flightily and chides Lucetta for teasing her. Julia then tears up the letter and sends Lucetta away, but regrets her actions almost immediately. Meanwhile, Proteus's father Antonio also decides to send his son to the Duke's court in Milan to improve himself along with his best friend Valentine. The decision upsets both Proteus and Julia because they have to part. But before they do, they exchange rings and vow their love and faithfulness to one another. Since going to Milan, Valentine has fallen in love with the Duke's daughter Sylvia. However, the Duke wants Sylvia to marry Thurio, a foolish but wealthy suitor. Sylvia wants nothing to do with this fool. Unfortunately, when Proteus arrives at court, he also falls in love with Sylvia and completely forgets about his commitment to Julia. Instead, Proteus plots to win Sylvia away from Valentine. When Valentine tells Proteus in confidence that he and Sylvia are going to elope, Proteus betrays his friend and tells the Duke of their plans, thus gaining favor for himself with the Duke and getting Valentine banished from court. Meanwhile, back in Verona, Julia decides to disguise herself as a man so that she can journey to Milan and meet up with Proteus. But when she arrives at court, she sees Proteus wooing Sylvia and is heartbroken. After the banished Valentine leaves Verona, he and Speed travel to Mantua, but are apprehended by a group of outlaws who live in the forest. The outlaws are actually former gentlemen who have been banished, and they insist that Valentine become their king. Since they all threaten to kill him if he refuses, Valentine accepts their offer. Back in Milan, Proteus makes his love known to Sylvia, but she scorns him for being a false friend and lover. Proteus then sends Julia, who is disguised as a page boy named Sebastian, to Sylvia to get Sylvia's picture. When Julia gets the picture, she gives Sylvia the ring Proteus had given her. Julia does not reveal her identity, and Sylvia refuses the ring. Sylvia asks her friend Sir Eglamour to help her escape her father's oppressive will so that she can avoid having to marry Thurio and seek out Valentine. However, while traveling through the forest, Sylvia and Eglamour are overtaken by a band of outlaws. Frightened, Eglamour runs away and leaves Sylvia there to fend for herself. At the same time, the Duke, Proteus, Thurio, and Sebastian, who is really Julia in disguise, go into the woods in search of Sylvia. Proteus manages to free Sylvia from the outlaws. Meanwhile, Valentine watches their interaction unseen. Proteus demands that Sylvia give him some sign of her gratitude for freeing her, but she refuses. Angry at being rebuffed, he threatens to rape her, but Valentine jumps out and prevents him. Immediately, Proteus is ashamed of his despicable behavior and instantly apologizes to Valentine. Valentine immediately forgives him and offers to give Proteus Sylvia as a demonstration of their friendship, or so it seems. Suddenly, Sebastian faints and Proteus, Valentine, and Sylvia discover that it is really Julia in disguise. Proteus is overcome with emotions, realizes that he loves Julia more than Sylvia, and takes her instead. The Duke is disgusted when he sees that Thurio is a coward and says that Valentine is far nobler. He also gives him his blessing to marry Sylvia. Valentine asks the Duke to grant clemency for the outlaws, which he does, and recommends that his marriage to Sylvia and Proteus's marriage to Julia take place on the same day. They all depart together to fill each other in about everything that has happened. When we return, we'll take a look at some of the remarkable characters in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. All right, now let's take a look at some of the main characters of The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Let's start off with the lead characters. Valentine's name means strong and healthy. This also applies to his commitment to love. He proves himself to be a loyal and committed lover to Sylvia. Proteus, on the other hand, name means the changeable one. Although he professes to love Julia, he drops her like a hot potato once he gets a good look at Sylvia and realizes that his best friend is in love with her. That sounds pretty changeable to me. Julia is apparently an independent and well-to-do young lady of Verona. Her parents are never mentioned, and she decides to leave all of her lands to her waiting woman and confidant Lucetta when Julia leaves for Milan. Julia is also a bit immature, flighty, fickle, and a bit self-absorbed. Even after she hears Sylvia stand up for her, though Sylvia doesn't know that Sebastian is actually Julia in disguise, Julia still indicates that she'd like to scratch her eyes out of jealousy, or at least her picture's eyes out. Sylvia, on the other hand, is the beautiful and loving daughter of the Duke of Milan. She is in love with Valentine, and she's willing to risk life and limb to go through the forest full of bandits just to be with him. And despite Proteus's lame attempts to win her, she never wavers from her devotion to Valentine. Let's talk about Thurio and Sir Eglamour. Although Thurio is wealthy and the Duke of Milan initially wants him to marry Sylvia, he proves himself to be a coward when push comes to shove. He's not really what you would call marriage material. Sir Eglamour also turns out to be a coward when confronted with forest-dwelling bandits. However, let's give him some credit. Sylvia asks him for his help because she knows he has loved before in the past, and he's agreed to help her. He never threatens to rape her in the forest like Proteus does, but unfortunately, he did run away when he was outnumbered. Let's just say he's a lover, not a fighter. There's also Lance, Proteus's servant, who is always going off about his dog Crab. He's there for comic relief, but he's pretty dim-witted and very annoying. He's even willing to beat Valentine after he's been banished. Speed, on the other hand, is Valentine's servant. Speed is very quick-witted, far more so than his master, and he helps explain to Valentine that Sylvia is actually getting him to write love letters for her so that he'll know that she loves him. He serves to poke fun at the pathetic lovers and often comments on how love is blind, and so are they. When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from The Two Gentlemen of Verona. The Two Gentlemen of Verona is believed by many to be Shakespeare's very first play, but that doesn't mean we won't see some of the same tried-and-true plot devices we've come to love in his later plays. First, we have a boy actor playing Julia, a young woman who disguises herself as a male page in order to keep her eye on her less-than-loyal boyfriend Proteus. Shakespeare knew that this was a great way for one character to learn what another character is really thinking and give the audience a lot of fun. Next, we have a father who wants to pick a husband for his daughter, despite her own wishes and preferences. What could be more suspense-building and empathy-building to the audience than this? Because it leads to the inevitable desire for forbidden but true love and, as in many Shakespeare plays, a planned elopement. There's also the nearly obligatory exchanging of rings to demonstrate the fidelity of the parting lovers Proteus and Julia. And we also see the first appearance of Shakespeare's characters fleeing to a forest, but certainly it won't be the last. As far as memorable scenes go, I've noted 6 that are worth mentioning. In Act 1, Scene 1, Speed takes great joy in mocking Proteus for being cheap. In Act 1, Scene 2, Lucetta taunts her mistress and friend Julia as the two girls talk about suitors. Their relationship is very similar to Rosalind and Celia in As You Like It, and Portia and Nerissa in The Merchant of Venice. Lucetta is one of the most genuine characters in the entire play. When asked by Julia why she prefers Proteus as the best suitor, she simply replies, "I have no other reason but a woman's reason. I think him so because I think him so." This is very reminiscent of Rosalind's comments to her cousin Celia when she keeps interrupting her about Orlando. She says, "Don't you know that I am a woman? When I think, I must speak." This is Shakespeare just demonstrating why we love his characters so much, because they're real and they remind us of ourselves. In Act 2, Scene 1, Speed has to come to Valentine's rescue and explain to him that Sylvia likes him. Here's an amusing exchange explaining why it's so obvious to him that Valentine loves Sylvia. Valentine asks him, "Why, how know you that I am in love?" "Marry, by these special marks. First, you have learned, like Sir Proteus, to wreathe your arms like a malcontent, to relish a love song like a robin redbreast, to walk alone like one that had the pestilence, to sigh like a schoolboy that had lost his ABC, to weep like a young wench that had buried her grandam, to fast like one that takes diet, to watch like one that fears robbing, to speak puling like a beggar at Hallowmass. You were wont, when you laughed, to crow like a cock. When you walked, to walk like one of the lions. When you fasted, it was presently after dinner. When you looked sadly, it was for want of money. And now you are so metamorphosed with a mistress that when I look on you, I can hardly think you my master." This is very reminiscent of Rosalind describing a lover's qualities to Orlando in As You Like It. Act 4, Scene 2, Sylvia demonstrating her loyalty to Valentine and rebuking Proteus for his false love is also quite memorable. In Act 4, Scene 4, a disguised Julia encounters Sylvia, who demonstrates her honorable qualities and true love. In Act 5, Scene 4, Valentine rescuing Sylvia from Proteus and Julia revealing her true identity is by far the most memorable scene in the entire play. As you study The Two Gentlemen of Verona, you'll probably discover that Speed is the most enjoyable character in the play, and Sylvia is the most honorable character. Next up, we'll take a look at some of the major themes running through The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Two of the other themes that run heavily through The Two Gentlemen of Verona are fickleness and camaraderie. There's a lot of criticism of Proteus's character in the play, and rightfully so, but it wouldn't be fair not to also point out some of Julia's less than attractive qualities. For example, there is her fickleness when dealing with her trusted confidant and friend, Lucetta, who only wants the best for her. One moment, Julia is praising her for being a goodly broker for bringing Proteus's letter to her. The next, she's calling her a saucy minion and chiding her for her efforts. Is this any way to treat your maid? No wonder it's so hard to find good help these days. Proteus, we see, is also fickle, and he exchanges his affections for Julia to Sylvia after one brief encounter. Here he is in Act 2, Scene 6, when he determines not only to pursue Sylvia, but to throw his best friend Valentine under the bus and get him banished. To leave my Sylvia shall I be forsworn. To love fair Sylvia shall I be forsworn. To wrong my friend I shall be much forsworn. And even that power which gave me first my oath provokes me to this threefold perjury. Love bade me swear, and love bids me forswear. O sweet suggesting love, if thou hast sinned, teach me thy tempted subject to excuse it. At first I did adore a twinkling star, but now I worship a celestial sun. Unheedful vows may heedfully be broken, and he wants wit that wants resolved will to learn his wit, to exchange the bad for better. Fie, fie, unreverend tongue, to call her bad whose sovereignty so oft thou hast preferred with 20,000 soul-confirming oaths. I cannot leave to love, and yet I do. But there I leave to love where I should love. Julia I lose, and Valentine I lose. If I keep them, I needs must lose myself. If I lose them, thus find I, by their loss, for Valentine myself, for Julia, Sylvia. I to myself am dearer than a friend, for love is still more precious in itself. And Sylvia, witness heaven that made her fair, shows Julia a swarthy Ethiop. This is not a race thing. In Shakespeare's time, fair skin was a sign of nobility because women of status did not do any laboring work that exposed them to the sun. Thus, their skin was lighter. But Shakespeare often uses example of light and darkness just to demonstrate contrast, as well as differences in height, like with Helena and Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream, or with Octavia and Cleopatra in Antony and Cleopatra. He continues, I will forget that Julia is alive, remembering that my love to her is dead. And Valentine, I hold an enemy, aiming at Sylvia as a sweeter friend. I cannot now prove constant to myself without some treachery used to Valentine. This night he meaneth with a corded ladder to climb celestial Sylvia's chamber window, myself in counsel his competitor. Now presently I'll give her father notice of their disguising and pretended flight, who all enraged will banish Valentine, for Thurio he intends shall wed his daughter. But Valentine being gone, I'll quickly cross by some sly trick, blunt Thurio's dull proceedings. Why would he care about crossing Thurio if he didn't bother him to cross his best friend Valentine? Love, lend me wings to make my purpose swift, as thou hast lent me wit to plot this drift. Speed is also a good friend to Valentine, even though he's a servant. There's also a camaraderie between Speed and Lance. After all, they're both servants to two best friends, but the two of them couldn't be more different. Speed gives good advice and is always trying to help his master Valentine, especially in the ways of love. Lance is just an annoying fool who almost beats Valentine for no reason, gives Lady Sylvia the wrong dog, and is always going off about his own dog Crab, who is a disgusting creature that urinates at feasts and is always getting into trouble. Despite their hot and cold relationship, you can tell that Lucetta truly cares about Julia and wants her happiness, and it's also good to see that Julia eventually does right by Lucetta and promises to leave her all of her lands and goods when she leaves Milan to pursue Proteus. And even though Proteus allows love, or rather infatuation, to mistreat his lifelong friend Valentine, eventually the two make up and plan a double wedding. Let's just hope that Proteus can manage to stay true to Julia, at least past the honeymoon. This is by far a play about change, and there are many references to it. In Act 2, Scene 4, Valentine verbally spars with his rival Thurio for Sylvia's affections. When she says to Thurio, "Do you change color?" Valentine says, "Give him leave, madam. He is a kind of chameleon." A chameleon is a lizard whose best-known unique quality is to change colors to match its surroundings. Throughout the entire play, Valentine pledges his love for Sylvia and never wavers, even after being banished by her father, the Duke. In Act 5, Scene 4, we see Sylvia demonstrate her disdain for Proteus's inconsistency to Julia and Valentine and her constancy in loving Valentine. Sylvia says to him, "Had I been seized by a hungry lion, I would have been breakfast to the beast rather than have false Proteus rescue me. O heaven, be judge how I love Valentine, whose love's as tender to me as my soul, and full as much for more there cannot be. I do detest false perjured Proteus, therefore begone, solicit me no more." And Proteus responds, "What dangerous actions stood it next to death would I not undergo for one calm look? Oh, 'tis the curse in love, and still approved when women cannot love where they're beloved." Sylvia replies, "When Proteus cannot love where he's beloved, read over Julia's heart, thy first, best love, for whose dear sake thou didst then rend thy faith into 1,000 oaths, and all those oaths descend into perjury to love me. Thou hast no faith left, unless thou hast two, and that's far worse than none. Better have none than plural faith, which is too much by one. Thou counterfeit to thy true friend." Proteus says, "In love, who respects friends?" And she zings him with, "All men but Proteus." Well, as you can see, Proteus deserves to be put into the bad boyfriends category, along with Bertram in All's Well That Ends Well, Demetrius in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Mark Antony in Antony and Cleopatra. If we're going to talk about constancy, we need to mention Sir Eglamour. We learned that Sylvia turned to him to help her find Valentine because he's a gentleman whose true love has died and has since taken a vow of chastity. Even though he doesn't have a big part and he turns out to be a coward, his intentions were good. And although Julia certainly deserves better treatment from Proteus, let's not forget that she could be very inconstant to her loyal servant and confidant Lucetta. When we return, we'll take a look at some of Shakespeare's most powerful lines from The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Before we look at the most powerful lines in the play, I want to point out that the Duke of Milan revokes his punishment at the end of the play so that the lovers can get married. Shakespeare loves this concept of dukes commuting sentences and pardoning injustice to ensure that there's a happy ending, as we see with Duke Frederick in As You Like It, Duke Theseus in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Duke Solinus in The Comedy of Errors, and Duke Vincentio in Measure for Measure. Early on in the play, Shakespeare gives us a glimpse into Proteus's self-examination. This is Act 1, Scene 1, right after Valentine leaves to better himself in Milan, and Proteus stays behind because he's in love with Julia. He after honor hunts, I after love. He leaves his friends to dignify them more. I leave myself, my friends, and all for love. thou, Julia, thou hast metamorphosed me, made me neglect my studies, lose my time, war with good counsel, set the world at naught, made wit with musing weak, heart sick with thought. And of course, loyalty isn't Proteus's only shortcoming, and Shakespeare lets us see that Proteus is, as they say on Seinfeld, careful with money. Here's Speed needling Proteus about his cheapness. Proteus says, "Beshrew me, but you have a quick wit." Speed says, "And yet it cannot overtake your slow purse." In Act 5, Scene 4, there are many highlights, but let's look at Julia confronting Proteus after revealing her true identity and forcing him to reveal and examine his true self. When he asks where she got the ring he had given Julia, she says, "And Julia herself did give it me, and Julia herself had brought it hither." And she reveals that it's really her in disguise. "How? Julia?" And she says, "Behold her that gave aim to all thy oaths, and entertained them deeply in her heart. How oft hast thou with perjury cleft the root? O Proteus, let this habit make thee blush. Be thou ashamed that I have took upon me such an immodest raiment, if shame live in a disguise of love. It is the lesser blot modesty finds, women to change their shapes, than men their minds." And he repeats, "Than men their minds. 'Tis true, O heaven, were man but constant, he were perfect. That one error fills him with faults, makes him run through all the sins. Inconstancy falls off ere it begins." Here at least we get to see Proteus recognizing his own shortcomings and demonstrating some sincere guilt for what he's done. Hopefully he will spend his married life making it up to Julia for everything that he put her through. I'd like you to ask yourself, how does Proteus manage to rescue Sylvia from the entire group of bandits while the Duke, Thurio, and Sir Eglamour remain captive? Also, why doesn't Julia stop Proteus from attempting Sylvia's rape? You would think her revealing herself at that very moment might have broken his train of thought. But if Shakespeare didn't want controversy, he certainly wouldn't have started off his career writing The Two Gentlemen of Verona. As we see in Act 5, Scene 4, Proteus is so frustrated with Sylvia's continuous rejections of him that he threatens to rape her. Talk about creating a problem play. Not that this is the only time Shakespeare includes an attempted rape. It happens with Bolt nearly ravishing Marina in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and Cloten plotting to rape Imogen in Cymbeline. And of course, Lavinia actually gets gang raped in Titus Andronicus by brothers Chiron and Demetrius. And although Proteus apologizes to Valentine for betraying his friendship, he never apologizes to Sylvia for his actions. Why is this? Well, it has to do with the bro code. In Shakespeare's time, the bonds between male friendship were considered much stronger than the relationships between men and women. But this wasn't new. In Christ's time, the married apostles provided for and left their wives behind in order to follow Jesus. The main reason men were so close in Shakespeare's plays is because they had to be able to trust each other when they were going off to war, making legislature, banding together to overthrow tyrants, and rounding up conspirators. If you couldn't trust your friends, you might find yourself beheaded or executed in the history plays or stabbed to death in the tragedies. We see evidence of this close male bonding with Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, Antonio and Bassanio in The Merchant of Venice, Arcite and Palamon in The Two Noble Kinsmen, Hamlet and Horatio, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and Don Pedro, Claudio, and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing. In fact, when Beatrice first asks Benedict, "Kill Claudio," his response is, "Not for the wide world." Even in Henry V, the boy says that Bardolph and Nym are sworn brothers in filching. In other words, they're as thick as thieves. But the female characters often had very close friendships as well, no doubt because they found themselves in the same roles and had the same responsibilities, staying home and caring for their children while their husbands were away. We see this with Desdemona and Emilia in Othello, with Mistress Page and Mistress Ford in The Merry Wives of Windsor, with Portia and Nerissa in The Merchant of Venice, and of course with Rosalind and Celia in As You Like It. I believe this is the reason Shakespeare felt it was more important for Proteus to apologize for betraying Valentine's friendship than for attempting to rape Sylvia. But as you can see, when that male bond has been restored, it seems to be implied that all the other trespasses have also been forgiven. Well, at least I've given you something else to think about. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in this play, as well as some of the correlations to other Shakespeare plays. All right, now let's look at some of the major turning points in this play. Everything seems to be going smoothly until Proteus's dad decides to send him away from his love, Julia. Still, that would have been all right if he didn't decide to fall in love with Sylvia as soon as he sees her and betray his best friend, Valentine. Next, we have the banished Valentine, who's on his way to Mantua with speed and runs into some forest-dwelling bandits who are not only impressed by him, but make him an offer he can't refuse, to join them and be their king or to die. Now, that's what you call a major turning point in life. Note, this is the only real time that Valentine changes throughout the entire play, unless you want to count when he falls in love with Sylvia. There's another major turning point in Act 4, Scene 4, when Julia, disguised as Proteus' servant Sebastian, must ask Sylvia for her picture to give to Proteus. Even though this is an awkward situation, Sylvia, unaware of Julia's true identity, reveals her genuine compassion for Julia, who she feels has been wronged by Proteus. But what's even more interesting is that this scene allows us to see that Julia has some vanity and anger issues to work out. This is what she says to herself immediately after leaving Sylvia. A virtuous gentlewoman, mild and beautiful. Here is her picture. Let me see. I think if I had such attire, this face of mine were full as lovely as is this of hers. And yet the painter flattered her a little, unless I flatter with myself too much. Her hair is auburn. Mine is perfect yellow. If that be all the difference in his love, I'll get me such a colored periwig. This sounds a lot like Cleopatra asking questions about Octavia's appearance of her slave. Her eyes are gray as glass, and so are mine. Aye, but her forehead's low and mine is high. This sounds a lot like Hermia comparing herself with Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'll use thee kindly for thy mistress's sake, that used me so, or else by Jove I vow I should have scratched out your unseeing eyes to make my master out of love with thee. Remember, she's talking to the picture, not Sylvia. As you can see, Julia has some immature, petty, and childish qualities. However, none of these are the reasons why Proteus switches his affections to Sylvia. He does that out of inconstancy and a lack of fidelity. Even though this is no doubt one of Shakespeare's earliest plays, if not the earliest, he manages to include some content that we're going to see many times over in his other plays. For example, the Duke selects a poor choice of son-in-law for his daughter. We're going to see this over and over again with Master Page selecting Master Slender in The Merry Wives of Windsor, Cymbeline selecting Cloten in Cymbeline, Capulet selecting the County Paris in Romeo and Juliet, and Aegeus selecting Lysander in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Also, the bandits discover Valentine and instantly want him to be their king. Caliban wants Stephano to be his master in The Tempest. It's a very similar activity going on. The Duke also threatens to cut off Sylvia without a dowry, just like Capulet did in Romeo and Juliet and King Lear did with his daughter Cordelia. Speed, describing what a man in love looks like in a comical way, is very similar to Rosalind doing the same thing to Orlando in As You Like It. I love the confidential scenes in which one of Shakespeare's female characters is being encouraged to love by another close female character. In this case, we have Lucetta helping Julia, just as Nerissa assisted Portia in The Merchant of Venice, the nurse advising Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, and Celia talking with Rosalind in As You Like It. And finally, if you listen to Valentine's opening lines in Act 5, Scene 4, they mirror the same sentiments that Duke Sr. shares with his loyal noblemen after they settle into the Forest of Arden and learn to appreciate the simplicity of life in their woodland surroundings. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about the two gentlemen of Verona. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research and I came across some interesting facts. The Two Gentlemen of Verona is believed by many to be Shakespeare's very first play, and it's also thought to have been written in the early 1590s. And ironically, in his last play, The Two Noble Kinsmen, two best friends, Archite and Palamon, also fight over the same woman, Emilia. The more things change, the more things stay the same. It appears that Shakespeare drew from both the Spanish prose romance, The Seven Books of Diana, by Portuguese writer Jorge de Montemayor, published in Spanish in 1559, and also from Thomas Elyot's The Boke Named the Governor in 1531. Valentine is named after Saint Valentine, the patron saint of engaged couples, happy marriages, and love. Proteus shares his name with the shape-shifting sea god. How's that for sealing someone's fate? I also have some questions for you to ponder about this play. First, why doesn't Julia just go to Milan with Proteus when he leaves? She would have been protected. He would have been less likely to stray from her. She was willing to give away all of her possessions freely to Lucetta, which probably means she couldn't have done if her parents were still living. And she already told Lucetta that she wasn't worried about how the world would repute her for chasing after Proteus in disguise. Second, why does Valentine forgive Proteus so quickly at the end of the play, only minutes after he was about to rape Sylvia? After all, there's a difference between forgiving someone who is sorry after getting caught in the act and offering to give your lover to a remorseful attempted rapist. And finally, let's not forget about the elephant in the room. Proteus apologizes for betraying Valentine's friendship, but never apologizes for attempting to rape Sylvia, especially since he was going to do so in front of his servant, Sebastian, who just happens to be his future wife, Julia, in disguise. There are several theories about this, but the most plausible one seems to be that when Valentine says to Proteus, "All that was mine in Sylvia, I give thee," what he really means is, "I will love you, Proteus, with as much love as I love Sylvia." They may indeed have a double wedding, preferably after some serious marriage counseling, but I don't expect a lot of double dates for these couples in the foreseeable future. When we return, we'll look at some of the actors in the 1983 BBC Shakespeare version of The Two Gentlemen of Verona. All right, now let's take a look at some of the actors who performed in the 1983 BBC Shakespeare version of The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Joanne Pierce, who plays Sylvia, also played Luciana in The Comedy of Errors in 1983. Michael Byrne, who plays Antonio, also appears as bit characters in Henry VI Parts 1, 2, and 3, and as the Duke of Buckingham in Richard III, all in 1982. John Woodnutt, who plays Pathino, also played the Doctor in Macbeth in 1983. Adam Curican, who plays the first outlaw, also played Harold in King Lear in 1982 and the third knight in Pericles, Prince of Tyre in 1984. David Collings, who plays Thurio, also played Caius Cassius in Julius Caesar in 1979. Michael Graham Cox, who plays the host, also played the host of the Garter in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1982. And finally, Tessa Peake Jones, who plays Julia, also played Mrs. Summerlee in the 2001 A&E miniseries The Lost World, along with Robert Hardy, who played Sir Toby Belch in the BBC version of Twelfth Night in 1979, and Bob Hoskins, who played Iago in the BBC production of Othello in 1981. Now stay tuned and get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called Reunited. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called Reunited. Name the plays in which these mothers, fathers, and children are reunited. Number 1, Amelia, Aegean, Antipholus of Ephesus, and Antipholus of Syracuse. Number 2, Hermione, Leontes, and Perdita. And number 3, Thaisa, Pericles, and Marina. When we get back, I'll have the answers for you, as well as some relevant lessons from the two gentlemen of Verona. Okay, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge, which was called Reunited. You were to name the plays in which these mothers, fathers, and children are all reunited. Number 1, Amelia, Aegean, Antipholus of Ephesus, and Antipholus of Syracuse. That was the Comedy of Errors, of course. Number 2, Hermione, Leontes, and Perdita. That was The Winter's Tale. And number 3, Thaisa, Pericles, and Marina. And that was, of course, from Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Shame on you if you didn't get the last one. All right, as we wrap up for today, let's look at some relevant lessons from the two gentlemen of Verona. First, practice your congruency. Your words must always match your actions, not only when you're talking to the same person, but with whomever you're talking to. And remember, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. Next, when it comes to making vows, make sure that you keep yours. It's a terrible thing when you make a lifelong commitment to someone and don't keep your word. You need to be able to demonstrate that you can trust yourself before anyone else can trust you. And finally, be willing to forgive your friends their trespasses. To thine own self be true, as Polonius said. Certainly, you're going to disappoint a lot of people in your lifetime. Be big enough and gracious enough to practice forgiveness when the shoe is on the other foot. And remember, the best way to have a good friend is to be a good friend. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a Danish prince gets a frightening message from his father's ghost and has been brooding ever since.